Good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's Community View. My name is Sonia Samaniego, and I am the Family Engagement Coordinator. Today, I am joined by Germaine Graham with Definitely Communicating. So good morning, Germaine. I just have some questions for you that I'd like to go over with you this morning to learn a little bit more about yourself. So can you tell us about your journey of becoming a SLP? Tell us about why you chose this profession and how it came about that you are now practicing in this field.
All right. Well, thank you. Good morning, Sonia. Like you said, I'm Germaine. I am a speech language pathologist, and really my journey has been an interesting one. I did not start off really understanding or knowing about the field of speech language pathology when I entered college. I went to Jackson State University in Mississippi, and when I initially enrolled, I thought I would become a dentist. And I was not a huge fan of all of the science classes and the labs and the biology, the chemistry. And so I sat with my advisor, my freshman year in college, and just kind of talked to her about some fields that really interested me, or some things I think that I was more so interested in. Communication was one of those things. And so she was actually the one that suggested to me the field of speech language pathology. The degree was called communication disorders or communicative disorders. And I started taking some of those introductory courses and found those to be a lot more interesting, a lot more fascinating. Still a level of science involved and learning about the body and, you know, the functions of the brain, but not so heavily scientific that I was bored out of my mind, I guess. And so that's kind of how I started my journey in the field. But prior to that, actually, I grew up in Virginia, and I had a high school job. And my first high school job was working at McDonald's. And it was there that I actually met and encountered my first deaf adult. There were actually two deaf adults there at the McDonald's. And I just became really interested in communicating with them. I wanted to know how to sign. And I took that experience and that desire to learn sign language that stayed with me from then all the way until I got to college. And so one of the things that I did was make sure I enrolled in American Sign Language classes there at the school so that I could learn how to sign. It wasn't until later, though, that I learned about the Mississippi School for the Deaf and the fact that it was there in Jackson, literally about 15 minutes from the campus. And just that experience in high school, you know, the proximity of the school to where I was enrolled in college, the two just kind of fell together perfectly. And I was able to intern at the school, do my observation hours. And then upon graduation, I actually applied and started working at the Mississippi School for the Deaf. And so it's been an interesting journey, an amazing one, absolutely, but very interesting and not one that I actually initially set out to achieve. And so that's a little bit about how I got where I am now.
Wonderful. Yes. And, you know, we always think, you know, that we know where our destination is. And somehow along the line, you know, things that we experience, you know, veer us in a different direction. So this is definitely exciting. Definitely a benefit for those of us here in Arizona. So I think it's great, you know, and so we just want to learn a little bit more about you and really your passion for language acquisition. We've had some previous conversations, and we just really love your, you know, your passion for working with the deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind communities. So just tell us a little bit more about your passion for language acquisition and really wanting to reduce language deprivation for our communities of children with deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind individuals.
Yeah, I think that passion really came to life when I started working at the Mississippi School for the Deaf. Prior to that, I didn't have much experience or interaction, like I said, with deaf children or deaf adults, other than that high school kind of chance meeting. However, I really saw at the school the impact of language deprivation and how, we would have students coming to us age 6, age 7 that didn't know how to communicate, whether it was them speaking or them signing. They didn't have that foundation of language in order to understand the world around them. And, we see the impact of it there on campus. You're 7, you're in kindergarten, and you still don't know, things of how to communicate, how to express my needs and wants. What are the signs, or what's the language that goes with that? What's the vocabulary, or even skills such as turn taking and sharing and different things that are involved in language. And so I think from there, when I saw that, it really broke my heart. But at the same time, I knew that it was preventable. And I think that that's the thing that really makes me the most passionate about educating and advocating for deaf children and for the deaf community in general, is because language deprivation is 100% preventable. I think that if families received unbiased information, or maybe just a broad scope of the options that are available to them, rather than, encouragement for a particular kind of mode, or, developing spoken language skills and listening and all that, that is beneficial. But, language, I think, is the ultimate priority. It has to be the priority for our deaf and hard of hearing children. And how the children and how those families decide that the kids will express that language, that's a discussion for later. But I think that the ultimate focus, when a deaf child is identified as being deaf, language needs to be that focus. And we already know, parents often don't know this, but American Sign Language, or a visual language, is the most, 9 times out of 10, will be the most accessible language for that child because it's visual. When we are talking about acquiring language, we don't teach language, right? We don't necessarily do that. We communicate, and children pick up on the language that they're exposed to. In the event that kids do have hearing aids or cochlear implants, they're trying to learn how to listen, which I'm not really sure how you learn how to listen. You either hear or you don't. But, they're trying to acquire that language, but at the same time, it's not 100% clear, and they don't understand what they're hearing. And so it's a process when we focus only on those auditory skills, rather than if they have that full visual access, they're able to see that language. They can pick it up. They won't express it immediately, but they see it. They're starting to make sense of the world around them. And we use those strategies. We model the language. We imitate things around us. Whether our child, our hearing child even, they don't respond to us immediately, but we talk to them. They have no idea what we're saying, but we don't hold our language. We don't stop talking to them until they can actually respond. We stimulate them as much as possible in the way that's most accessible to them, and then they produce later on. And so I think if parents had that understanding of the difference between language and speech, and how those two really are worlds apart, but that we focused on that language development, making sure our children understand before we focus on how they will express, then language deprivation wouldn't be so rampant among the deaf and hard of hearing community. But again, it's 100% preventable. And I think that's what makes me so passionate, is because in my mind, I'm thinking, this does not have to be this way. This doesn't have to happen. We can use, strategies. We can use what we already have, a beautiful, bona fide language, such as American Sign Language, to really, really impact the language of these children.
Wonderful. Yes. Something that we all like to think of, right, as preventable. And I think that's key for just about, anything that we have here and that we encounter in our lives, is looking at those things that we can do to prevent, later concerns. So
Absolutely.
thank you for that. And lastly, we'd like to just kind of wrap up with this one here. You've bringing, a wealth of knowledge to Arizona. We've had conversations before about your transition here to our state and your family having to relocate. So tell us a little bit about why you chose to start your own business as definitely communicating.
All right. Well, it's so funny because I think even when I was in Mississippi, I always knew that I did want to work for myself. I wanted to be a private practitioner. My heart was so with the children at the school, and I mean, I loved my job, and I really could never see myself breaking away from that. And so now that I've transitioned, I had to leave that behind in a sense. I'm still very much connected to my kids and my family and the staff there at the Mississippi School for the Deaf. But being here in Arizona, I didn't talk much about my family before, but I do have 3 children, and my oldest daughter is disabled. And so I knew that as she got older, she would need me a little bit more. She's very dependent, about 90% dependent on us helping her with lots of activities of daily living and dressing and, brushing teeth and all those kind of things, taking care of herself. And so I needed to basically give myself some time freedom and a chance to be with my family more. And I had written a plan or just my dreams, put those down on paper when I was in Mississippi and what that would look like for me. But I never really moved, to do anything about it. And it just so happened that when I moved here to Arizona, I was introduced to a program called the We Rise program. It was a business accelerator specifically for African American business owners or entrepreneurs or aspiring to be, because at that time I was not one. I was just aspiring. I didn't have the business. It wasn't up and running or anything. And so I submitted for the program, told them about what my plan was on paper. I had my business plan. I felt like I had things good. And they were like, this is a good start, but that's not quite it. And so, I was accepted into that program, and that really helped to fuel even more the passion that I had, because now I had the passion, but I did not have necessarily the skills or the know-how. And so it was just, again, a beautiful marriage of how those two came together and just allowed me now to step out and to launch this business. The page on Instagram, so I do have an Instagram page. I started that in May to coincide with better, what we call in our field of speech language pathology, Better Hearing and Speech Month. And I started the page more so to raise awareness of the fact that that really wasn't a fully inclusive term. And so, a dear friend and colleague in the space, Kimberly Sanzo with Language First, she uses the term Better Language and Communication Month. And so we kind of use that month to amplify that and to, again, echo and kind of share information about, the emphasis should not be on speech, it should be on language, those kinds of things. And just through that month, I watched how, the page grew and people were really seeking this kind of information, this kind of knowledge. At that time, I was still in the program. I had not yet graduated, but that helped to kind of further reassure me that, yes, this is what you need to be doing. You can do this. People are looking for this information. Families need this information. They need this knowledge, and they need tools and resources and just information on how to work with their deaf and hard of hearing child. And so it just all kind of came together. I've started working with clients, both deaf and hearing, definitely communicating, specializes in bilingual ASL English services, bimodal. I am an ASL fluent speech language pathologist, but I also have, the background knowledge and the ability to work with children that have normal hearing levels. And so we serve, both, but my passion and my priority, really my specialty, is working with deaf and hard of hearing children and their families. But it provides me the opportunity to be there for my family and to basically have some flexibility and set my own schedule while still being in the field, and serving the families that need my support and need my help.
Wonderful. Such a great benefit to the families here in Arizona. And we are so excited to have you here and to continue to learn more about um, definitely communicating and how that support can be provided to the community. So thank you so much for joining us today. Um, this is really the conclusion of our community view for today. And we would just like to thank you for your time.
Well, thank you all so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.